Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank Nuffield Australia for the roller coaster scholarship that we've had over the last 4 years. I certainly have enjoyed it, and I'd really like to thank the team, Jodie, for not only supporting us over the last 4 years, but especially the last 4 to 6 months to help me get through my personal study and also the GFP, which is coming up in 10 days' time. So that is pretty exciting. I'm incredibly grateful to my sponsor as well, which is Wine Australia. And Jo Hargraves as well has been my go-to person. I don't feel like I've found the silver bullet for heat mitigation in vineyards, but I certainly have found some ways to help us mitigate heat to a better extent, I guess. So thank you, Wine Australia. Oops, sorry. Keely and Tom, my 2 adult children now. Keely was 18, Tom was 16 when I first took on this scholarship, and it was a huge thing for me to up and leave and go to Israel for 3 weeks. Both of them have stepped up, not only for me, but also for each other. So I'm extremely proud of my 2 gorgeous kids and thank them for letting me go on this amazing journey. I'm the grower liaison and viticulturist at Bleasdale Vineyards. We have recently just won the Halliday Winery of the Year, so I'm also incredibly proud to be part of that team. Not only has Bleasdale encouraged and supported me throughout this scholarship, they've also adopted some of the principles and practices I've found along the way. So a big thank you to our board, our general manager, Lee Warren, our senior winemaker, Paul Hopker, and as others have mentioned today, you're only as good as the people that you work with. So Scott Hocking and Shannon George, the guys that are day-to-day out in the vineyard and implementing some of these ideas, big thank you to them. So Langhorne Creek, which is the region that I work in, is located in South Australia. We are about an hour southeast of Adelaide on the Fleurieu Peninsula, and most of the vineyards are grown on or between the Angus and the Bremer rivers, right up to the shores of Lake Alexandrina. Historically, we've been classified as a cool climate region, and that's mainly due to this airflow that we have that originates from the Southern Ocean. It comes across Lake Alexandrina onto our vineyards, and it certainly does help the vines cool down, refresh and recuperate after a heat event. So why am I talking about heat mitigation? In January 2013, I was walking a grower's block. It was a 40-degree day. There was no airflow out in the vineyard. They didn't have any cover on the ground. It was stinking hot, and all I could smell was stewed fruit. I went back to that vineyard 3 days later, and you can see the result. The berries basically just fried in the heat. They didn't pick anything off that vineyard in that season. We know that different varieties tolerate heat better than others, and majority of this speech will be around a variety that we grow called Malbec, which is an important variety for us because it's our point of difference to other regions. And when we grow, when the conditions are favourable, it is one of the most magnificent wines that you can taste. Malbec, unfortunately, has a really low tolerance to heat, especially around veraison. And I'll talk about 2 recent years, 2020 and 2021, where we had a heat event around this delicate stage of veraison. We ended up harvesting 1.9 tonne per hectare in 2020 and 2.7 tonne per hectare in 2021. We would normally be looking to get 8 to 10, 12 tonne per hectare crop off of those vines. So some massive losses for us over those 2 years. So I've spoken about veraison a couple of times now. This is the stage where the berries start to ripen. So we get that accumulation of sugar, pH starts to drop away, the berries start changing colour, And grapevines breathe. That's another story, but they like airflow. So it's quite a delicate stage of growth. It's not the only stage of growth that can be affected. We don't usually get high heat events during November, but in this case, we had some bunches damaged during a heat event in November during flowering. While I was in California, many of the growers in the Napa, in Davis, in Clarksburg, south of Sacramento, and Paso Robles, all talked about a 2-week heat event during harvest, and they lost a huge amount of fruit last season during that event. So there is an issue. What can we do? Wine Australia recently engaged the University of Tasmania to look at the climatic state of the regions around Australia, wine regions around Australia. As you can see in this picture, our temperature during the wine growing season is going to increase, and also those heat degree days are likely to become more frequent. So we've got to find some alternatives or some ways that we can mitigate heat going forward. In 2019, I visited Israel, went to the north of Israel to the Kibbutz Yatif, the Nuffield Vineyards, and they were using a pressure chamber to measure sap flow in vines, and they irrigated accordingly, and it became really valuable information. They could prioritise water during a heat event. The pressure chambers are extremely labour intensive. They've been around for a long time and widely used in a lot of research papers. So he then took me to the Vale mountain wineries where they were using stem water potential, but they had automated the system through a company called Satura. So that gave them real-time data, very similar to what Hans is talking about as well. And in that photo, that's actually the little sensor is just here. So the sensor goes into the trunk and it measures sap flow. Supplant was another company that, as we were saying, real-time data, we can get information from all over the world and react to it. Supplant had actually installed dendrometers in 2 vineyards, one in the Adelaide Hills and one in McLaren Vale. They were based in the central Israel, near Afula, and they were able to monitor that the dendrometer data and irrigate the vines in Australia accordingly. So the dendrometer measures the trunk dimension, expansion and contraction over time. So once again, as the plant transpires, a nutrient is taken up. If that uptake is less than transpiration, the trunk will shrink, and vice versa at the end of the day. As transpiration ceases, nutrients is still taken up by the plant, the trunk will expand. So it measures that change, and you can react and irrigate accordingly. So back to Australia I come, and we decided to put a couple of dendrometers into of our blocks, a Shiraz and a Malbec. Certainly in the active growth stage, we found it really beneficial and we were able to reduce our irrigation rates in that stage. One of the things that we all need to do when we bring something new onto our property is ground truth. Because if we had continued to irrigate using this information on a regular basis, we would have over-irrigated our vines because as wine grape growers, we actually use a technique called deficit irrigation. So we pull the irrigation back post-flowering, pre-veraison, to stop the shoot tips from growing so the bunch becomes the source or the sink of nutrients. So if we'd continued on this path, the vine just wanted to keep growing, the dendrometers wanted to keep it growing. So we had to actually ignore that data for about 3 weeks. The system set up for this was based around citrus and table grapes. So it was just a slightly different program, and we just need to work on that to develop that program further. As I said, in California, they had some heat issues. Trellis design was slightly different so that they could shade fruit. And in the photo on the right-hand side was actually a vertically trained vine, and he was actually pulling those tips over so that he could increase the shaded area in that section. The other thing that they were doing in California was using shade cloth. So they were bringing shade cloth up just prior to a heat event and then dropping it back down again post-heat event. Huge labour cost involved in anything like that. So I'm not sure whether we would be able to sustain that in Australia. And the only other thing that I saw over a neighbour's fence was some misters in one block. In 2016, in conjunction with the Grape Growers Association, prior to getting this scholarship, we actually trialled some misters under vine. And I'll go back to that scenario of 2020 and 2021. This block actually increased those rates. We harvested 3.5 tonne per hectare and 5.5 tonne per hectare off of that block because of that misting system. It just cooled the vines down during a heat event. So we thought, well, that was pretty good. COVID hit, couldn't travel, so I started to look at what the warmer regions in Australia were doing. Certainly, overhead sprinklers are not new in any situation, but it is new to Langhorne Creek. We just don't utilise a sprinkler system in our area. We don't need it for frost control and we don't need it for irrigation. However, one of our neighbours actually just trialled these wobble sprinkler heads. Once again, going back to that 2020 figure of tonnes per hectare, we harvested 2.78. The misters were 5.5. He harvested 15 tonne per hectare from his Malbec block just by applying sprinklers. If you can see in this picture here, that was actually a vine that was out of the circumference of the sprinkler head. And those grapes actually shriveled because they missed out on that cooling system during the heat days. So what could we do based on that information? We certainly don't have a huge flow rate. So at 180 litres per hour, which is the output of those wobble sprinkler heads, we had to find an alternative. So once again, while I was in Israel, we looked at the gyros in central Israel with Netafim, gyro net sprinkler heads, the strip nets and the pulsars systems. They certainly can get it down to 5, 10, 15, 25 litres per hour. However, we didn't have access to that. We didn't have access to enough sprinklers during the time we wanted to install this. So we actually picked up a Nelson 10 sprinkler head, which brought the flow rate back to about 71 litres per hour. And then in conjunction with our irrigation supplier, we split each block into 2 sections. We put 2 valves on each block and we irrigated 3 rows on, 3 rows off, 3 rows on, and we alternated between those 2 valves every 5 minutes. This enabled us to, on a 43-degree day, enabled us to drop the temperature back to 38 degrees, which doesn't sound like much, but it is when you're out there. It increased the relative humidity and it also cooled the soil and the ground cover. So at the end of the day, when the vines were wanting to recover, they were cool and they were able to get going and make sure that they could pull nutrients and water to recover for the following day. In the last 2 years, we've turned them on 5 and 8 times, and we've harvested over 8 tonne. In one of the cases, we actually harvested 14 tonne per hectare in one of those blocks. So it seems to be working. We haven't had a huge heat event since, but it looks promising. So is irrigation the only solution? For us, definitely not. We have 4.9 hectares now under these overhead irrigation, and we've got another 50 hectares to cover. So we can't increase our flow rate any more than that. So for us, it's definitely not the answer. For me, soil health is really important. I've been in the industry now for 30 years, 32 years. Means I've got 8 years left, does it? I think he needs to up his number to 50, not 40. Back in those days, everything was slash and burn. You pretty much burnt everything out under vine and you killed every insect you possibly could find. So since joining Bleasdale, I've had the opportunity, we're not organic, but we certainly have decreased the amount of herbicide that we've applied. So going from 4 or 5 herbicide applications per year back to 1 if we absolutely have to. And multi-species crops down the vine row. It is such a joy to walk around the vineyard when you've got something like that underfoot. So the noise, the buzz of bees and insects is just great for the soul. It's also great for the soil. And while I was in New Zealand at an organic conference, there was a lot of information about mycorrhizal fungi and the symbiotic effect that can have with vines with nutrient and water uptake. So certainly we'll be heading down a more organic path, and hopefully we can see some benefits during heat with this. We certainly know that anything green under vine can reduce the soil temperature. That is pretty clear. Soil water holding capacity, can we increase that? So things like biochar we're going to look at as well to see if we can improve soil water holding capacity as well. I recently read a paper regarding some PhD students in Portugal where they isolated some bacteria from some salt flats in Spain. They applied it to some vines in a greenhouse environment. There was 2 different formulations. They then exposed the vines to some extreme heat events. And one of the formulations that they had was fantastic. It worked, the vines held up well in the heat when the others shriveled and died. So this is going to be a really interesting piece of science to look out for. There's also things like rootstocks, clones, and alternate varieties that we'll be looking at in the future as well. So we'll continue to look at this space, I guess. If anyone has any fantastic ideas for me, I'd love to have a chat to you at any stage during the next couple of days. And hopefully you'll see my report if you want to follow anything up with me, hopefully at the end of November after I finish the GFP. So hopefully we'll be able to find something that will be effective and environmentally friendly that can help our vines stay happy and healthy in a heatwave event. Thank you.